I want to stay as anonymous as possible with this. This was a very serious occurrence that I have PTSD about, and unfortunately, it scarred me. I'm changing all towns and names in this story, so there's no way it gets traced back to me. I've been a very reclusive person most of my life. It started at a young age. Even in my early school years, my teachers would tell my parents I had antisocial behavioral problems. I would even be included in some of the, I guess you would say, special 20-minute classes for speech and behavior in elementary school. At the time, I didn't comprehend why I was being brought there while the rest of my class wasn't. Middle school was when the pressures of the social hell that school is really started to set in. Kids started forming their friend groups, and that only carried over into high school and got worse. I never had learning disabilities or anything. I just had social issues, which had gotten better as I've grown older, but I would still consider myself an awkward, introverted person. However, I've made my close friends, and I'm grateful for that. But now let's talk about girls. Of course, being a social recluse comes with having trouble with the ladies. Honestly, not to get too graphic, but it means something to my story. I lost my virginity at 21. That's a bit late, I'd say. This was at the age of 23. I moved out of my parents' place already. I had been working a high-paying job in my field for a couple of years at that point already, and I bought a townhouse in my hometown. It was pretty affordable, but a nice and big townhouse. I don't live there anymore, but it was 2 floors. It was the kind of place that would impress girls at 23 if you owned it. So one day swiping on Tinder, I matched a pretty decent-looking girl. I'll call her Emily. We went on a date at a nearby restaurant for dinner. I was a little in my head, thinking she was judging me or I was acting awkward, and by the end of it, I felt like she'd never want to see me again. But when I was in bed after getting home, she told me she really liked me and had fun, and I was ecstatic, honestly. So we went on a 2nd, 3rd, and 4th date, and honestly, things felt great after I got out of my head. We became boyfriend-girlfriend fairly quickly, but the honeymoon phase didn't last forever. When you first start seeing someone, you get excited anytime they text or call you. You crave the attention because ideally it's a two-way thing. But slowly, I started feeling as though she was texting me maybe a bit too much. At all times of the day, she'd ask where I was. If I was doing something, or perhaps took my time in responding, she'd call me or send question marks to follow up. One day when we were on the couch, she demanded we share our locations with each other. I wasn't thrilled about this, even though I had nothing to hide. I did it anyway. So we're a couple months into the relationship, our location shared, and this is where things went really sour. She'd start asking me why I was at Phil's house and not answering her texts. It got so bad that one night when I was with Phil and my friend Mark in Phil's basement on a Friday night, she actually showed up to his house, and Phil's mom walked Emily downstairs. She didn't even hide the fact that she was pissed at me, and immediately spoke in a loud voice, almost a yell, reprimanding me for goofing around at Phil's house instead of answering her texts about going to some winery the following day. I asked her if we could discuss this later, but she insisted I leave with her. I apologized to my friends and went outside with her. We had an argument in the street. She wanted to come home with me, but I told her no. We both drove separately, obviously, so I drove home and told her not to follow me. When I got home, I sent her a long text telling her we need a break and I need space. Should I have done this in person? Yeah, probably. Text message breakups aren't fair most of the time. But honestly, in the moment, I was scared of what her reaction would be in person. Of course, she started calling me over and over, blowing up my phone with texts. When I eventually stopped answering, I got aggressive pounds at my front door of my townhouse and constant rings from the doorbell. It got so bad that my neighbor actually came out and asked her what she was doing. I heard Emily screaming at him that I'm a piece of shit and this and that, and my neighbor calmly told her to go home. I listened to everything with my ear basically up to the door. She did leave, and honestly I was kind of disturbed. I'm not saying the crazy just came out of nowhere, there were definitely signs, but I was blind to some of it because of the honeymoon effects. The next day, I remembered to stop sharing my location with her, and immediately, as if she were obsessively checking our texts, she angrily blows me up for doing that. I was more and more sure of my decision to cut ties with her every text she sent. My final text to her was, "I'm sorry, Emily, I have to block you for a while, you're scaring me." She surprisingly didn't come knocking or anything. However, I noticed she instantly stopped sharing her location as well. It was exactly 1 week later. I went over to Phil's house again and chilled with the guys. I left around 11 p.m. and got home shortly after. I wasn't tired and I was hungry, so I threw some food in the microwave and plopped on the couch to watch a movie. I was browsing all the streaming apps for something good. I wanted a scary movie. When the microwave beeped and it went silent, I suddenly heard a click or thud from the dining room. So the layout of the downstairs of the townhouse, it looped around in a circle. It went from the kitchen to dining room to living room to den, and they were all separated by a wall in the middle. However, the den to the dining room had a door, not an opening. I attached this photo to give a better idea. To allow for complete silence, I grabbed the TV remote and muted the TV, and it was then that I surely heard the door separating the den and the dining room clicking open. I peered into the dining room. I blurted out, "Who's in here?" to of course nothing in response. I entered the dining room, my blood running cold as I saw that door was opened. I have a thing for keeping doors in my home shut, and that door was no exception. I went to the kitchen and grabbed the biggest knife from the knife block. I also called 911 right away. I had never called 911 once in my life. This was a first. On the phone, I spoke really loud so that whoever was in there would hear that I was on the phone with the police. Whether this was a good idea or not, I guess is debatable. I said, "I think my crazy ex-girlfriend has broken into my house. Please send someone." The rest of that call was explaining what exactly was going on, why I thought it was my ex, and her instructing me to wait outside if possible. So I went outside and waited not far from the front door. Surprisingly quickly, a police car rolled up. I once again briefly explained what I thought was going on, and I led the officer into my home. We both performed the most thorough search of the place together, and I'm telling you, no one was in there. We checked the mini crawl space hidden in the closet. We checked every closet for that matter. We checked under the beds, under the couches, even the mini attic too. When the coast was quite literally clear, he told me to call again if I heard anything, which said to me that he believed me and knew I wasn't making it up or going crazy. My night was obviously disturbed after that. No way I was going to be able to sit in the living room and watch a movie now. I ate my food, which had been sitting in the microwave, and went up to my room and locked the door. I texted all my friends and family, of course, about how spooked I was. But given that no one was in there, I had to dismiss it as just one of those creepy moments of something in the house moving by itself. I almost texted Emily, but refrained from doing so. I took a melatonin, and from what I remember, I quickly drifted off to sleep surprisingly. However, I'm a light sleeper, and something caused me to wake up. I didn't know what it was, but something in the room felt off. I checked my phone, and I had a bunch of texts from a random number. That must have been what woke me up. I quickly realized it was Emily. In short, without reading the paragraph she sent me, she was stating how sorry she was and that she wanted to talk. She was begging me to see her to talk tomorrow in person, and the rest of the texts were her saying, "Are you awake?" and "wake up" over and over. She said "wake up" a total of 8 times over text. Surprisingly, she hadn't tried calling me though. I responded, "Why are you awake right now? This is crazy that you're blowing me up at an hour like this. Honestly, if I wasn't sure before, your actions just these past few days alone have confirmed that I don't want anything to do with you anymore. Please just leave me alone." Seconds after I pressed send, I heard a scream from inside of the closet next to my bed. It was Emily's voice, yelling the word "no," and then the closet door burst open. I didn't have time to think of anything besides jumping out of the bed and getting that bedroom door open and getting out of the room. It wasn't locked anymore, mind you. Once out of the room, I pushed the door shut and held it shut as she tried opening the door. She didn't just try opening it though. She started stabbing the door, and I saw the knife she was wielding piercing through my side. In the moment, I decided to scream, "Baby, I love you, stop," instead of something like, "You're sick and you need help." When I said I loved her, she stopped and calmed down, and I took this moment to call 911 again silently while still holding the door shut. At this moment, we spoke through the door to each other while I had 911 on the line, and I came up with some bullshit on the spot that I was going through a rough time right now, but that I loved her and was planning on getting back with her. She said in a frantic voice, "That's all I wanted to hear, why couldn't you just be honest with me?" She asked me to open the door. I had to stall though. I told her I was scared and wanted her to drop the knife. Eventually, she agreed, and I told her to throw it across the room so I could hear it land. She did so. I heard the clang of the knife ricocheting off the wall and onto the floor. So what I did next, I yanked the door open and tackled Emily to the floor. She screamed and fought and went hysterical. I didn't care. I held her down as I yelled my address and everything into the phone, which was still connected to 911. I held her down all the way until the police arrived. To my surprise, the police literally kicked the front door down, and it was so loud it could be heard over Emily struggling all the way upstairs. Police entered the room quickly, a surprising amount of police actually. Emily was put in cuffs quickly, and she was hysterically crying. I think the only reason I wasn't crying was because I was in such shock. This was the worst, most scarring night of my life. The nightmare didn't end there though. There was such a long and serious legal process that followed as far as getting Emily convicted. I never wanted my name or any info to be out there on the internet to end up on one of those crime YouTube channels, so I've been careful about leaking too much information that could get back to me. Emily's in prison for some very serious charges. No part of that makes me happy. This was someone I spent a little chunk of my life with more or less every day. Someone I thought I loved. Someone who tried to kill me. She was not right in the head, and it still pains me how oblivious I was, not only because of how infatuated I became at first, but because of my own lack of self-confidence to a degree that I was so focused on impressing her at first that I didn't even pay attention to certain alarming behaviors on her part early on. I know this will stick with me forever, and honestly, even if anonymously, it would feel good to get this story out there finally if it's chosen to be read. It was spring break 2023. My friend Michelle and I booked a trip to Miami for a weekend. It was both of our first times in Miami. We were both 22. We stayed at some full house rental in Wynwood, which was like a 20-minute Uber from the beach. We got there on Thursday and we were staying until Monday. We landed pretty late in the day Thursday, so we just went out to some nearby bars for the first night. It was fun. The following day, we Ubered to Miami Beach to have a beach day. We brought the towels from the rental and just laid on the beach for hours. Multiple groups of guys approached us, and we just reject them or whatever. But there was one guy who approached us, I guess specifically me, that just had this really charming accent, seemingly nice forward personality, and honestly everything about him was handsome, from his hair down to his physique. He introduced himself as Will. He asked what our plans for the night were and asked for my number, and honestly I gave it to him. Then he was off on his way down the beach. He didn't seem to be with anyone. We watched to see if he'd stop and try to get more numbers, but he didn't. He was just walking away looking at his phone, and eventually walked off the beach in the direction of the street. Michelle was a little jealous that he showed me more attention, I could tell. Later that day, after the beach and some bars, we left Miami Beach because it was a little too crazy for us. Definitely because it was spring break, but it was just a bit much. We returned to the rental with some drinks and snacks from a nearby store. We drank in the backyard by the pool, listening to music on Michelle's speaker while we plotted our night. It was around this time I shot Will a text asking what he was doing for the night. He responded very quickly, saying he and his friend didn't have plans yet, and then he suggested the four of us go out by us in Wynwood. Michelle jokingly asked if the friend was cute, but I wasn't going to ask that. We made a plan for Will and his friend to come pregame with us at the rental, so they came around 8. The friend's name was Ken, and he was surprisingly good looking as well. I could tell Michelle was pleasantly surprised. They brought their own drinks and left them on the counter in the kitchen, and we drank in the yard for like an hour. They seemed very normal. All seemed like it was going well. We eventually walked to a nearby bar. It was also in Wynwood. I have to admit, Michelle and I were already drunk, and Ken and Will kept buying rounds of shots. Things became a blur pretty quickly. I wouldn't say I blacked out, but bits and pieces of my memory became foggy at that point. Eventually, Michelle and Ken went to another side of the bar, presumably to hook up, so I was alone with Will for quite some time. Eventually, I had to go to the bathroom, but before I left, I remember him calling out, "What do I want for my next drink?" I replied back, "A tequila soda." When I came back out from the bathroom, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Will was like hovering over the corner of the bar, clearly doing something sketchy. I walked a certain direction to get a better angle, and I saw he had the 2 drinks in front of him, but he was hovered over them as if he were doing something to my drink. I may have been drunk, but that was enough for my intuition to tell me to leave. I walked away without him noticing to the other side of the bar, looking for Michelle, but she and Ken were gone apparently. So I rushed out of the bar and tried calling her a bunch of times, but she never picked up. Around this time, Will texted me asking where I went. I ignored it. I texted Michelle a bunch of times, asking what happened, where is she? And then I eventually dropped the bomb that I think Will was trying to roofie me and that we should get away from these guys. I started walking back to the Airbnb. This was when Michelle texted back, asking, why do you think he was roofieing you? And I said because he was hovering over the drink he ordered for me, doing something to it. She texted back, maybe he was just on his phone. I tried calling her, but again, she didn't pick up. She texted back instead, saying, I'm still with Ken, just text. I responded to her that I already left, so I'm not going back anyway, and I suggested she meet me at the Airbnb. She responded, I'll be back soon. So I walked back. When I got back, I let myself in with the code lock. The door automatically locked after like 10 seconds. Same thing with the back door. I sat, really drunk and by myself, honestly worried about Michelle, but also I feel like I was wondering if I was just overthinking the whole roofies thing. Maybe he was just on his phone. Either way, it was too late now. I was surprised that Will never attempted to text or call me again. Next thing I remember was the doorknob to the back door jiggling, and then I heard the button sound effects of the code lock, followed by a failed attempt sound effect. I then got a text from Michelle saying to open the back door. I went to the back door and called Michelle's name through the door. She didn't answer though. So I tried calling her phone, but she didn't pick up. I got a text back saying, hurry, open the door, he's coming. And this was when I really started to freak out. I yelled through the door, Michelle, you're scaring me. There was no peephole or windows to look through to see if it was really her. I begged her to please answer me. She never did. There was a peephole in the front door, so I hurried to the front and looked through it. I actually felt sick at this moment, scared for my life, because I saw what looked like Will hiding to the side of the front door. A million thoughts crossed my mind, like if Michelle was running from Will. I was still too terrified to open the back door without her confirming it was her. I texted her back that I'm calling 911 right now. She didn't respond. I actually did call 911 and explained, and while I was on the phone, I checked the peephole again, and Will was gone. When police showed up, I let them in, and within 5 minutes, one of them asked if my friend was blonde, and I said yes. He then told me that another officer had her in their squad car and was bringing her here. I was so relieved, but also horrified. When she arrived in a second police car, she had been visibly crying. She was very, very drunk. To the best of her ability, she explained that she had her phone stolen and she was lost wandering the streets for an hour until someone helped her call the police. All of the texts I got from her number were never her. It was that guy she was with, Ken, or whatever his real name was. We also found her phone thrown in the pool in the backyard. They clearly took off the second I mentioned the police. We had to make a police report giving every last detail as specifically as possible. They said they'd get the surveillance footage from the bar we went to. We also had to contact the Airbnb host and immediately cancel our stay and go somewhere else. It was a long, nightmarish night. Obviously, the rest of our trip was completely spoiled. It took a whole week before hearing back anything from the police, and the only reason they called was to confirm what the name that guy that I was texting gave me, because it didn't align with the phone records for that number, which I'd already figured out myself. He was using another stolen phone. After that, I never heard from the police again, which is absolutely sickening how little priority the police put into cases like this, even with easy evidence. I have no interest in returning to Miami after this horrible experience. I could have honestly been killed. This happened last spring, about 9 months ago. I'm a sales associate for BMW, so my weeks are pretty busy. When I'm not at the dealership, I'm answering my phone. Because of all the phone work involved, sometimes I feel like I have more to do when I'm not at the dealership, as funny as that sounds. Because of the nature of my work, I pretty much have to answer my phone every time it rings, especially when it's an unknown caller. So, as you'd expect, I get a lot of scam calls, but I have no choice but to answer, just in case it's a client or an interested party. One night, sometime after 10 p.m., my phone started ringing. It was a number my phone didn't recognize. Normally, I would have picked up without thinking, but this time I was already in bed halfway through winding down. Something about how late it was just made me let it ring out. They didn't leave a voicemail. I figured if it was important, they'd leave one. But a few minutes later, the same number called again. I sat up and answered it. I was a little irritated, but I still tried to keep my voice polite, just in case it was someone serious. At first, all I heard was static, just this thick, uneven fuzz. I was about to hang up when I caught something underneath it. A voice. I held the phone closer and listened. It was my voice. I was 100% sure of it. That actually made me freeze up a little bit. After a few seconds, I realized it was more than just a recording of my voice. It was a conversation I'd had earlier that day with a client. Just standard stuff, pricing, availability, setting up a test drive. Nothing sensitive, but it was definitely real. It was definitely my voice. I still don't know if it was the right decision, but I instantly hung up the phone. I sat there for a while, just staring at my phone, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. I wasn't panicking, but I definitely wasn't calm either. The best way I can describe what I was feeling was a mix of confusion and unease. My first thought was that maybe it was the client I had talked to earlier. Maybe he had accidentally called me while trying to play back the call or record it for his own notes. I really don't know. It felt like a stretch, but it was the only explanation that didn't immediately spiral into something worse. That didn't really explain why the number was unknown instead of the number he had called from earlier, but it was the best I could come up with. The next morning, I decided to call him back just for my own sanity. He answered right away and seemed totally normal, friendly even. But when I brought up the call from the night before, he had no idea what I was talking about. He sounded genuinely confused. I apologized for the mix-up and hung up, and for whatever reason, I believed him. The rest of the day was normal. I had a few appointments, followed up with some leads, nothing out of the ordinary. I didn't think too much about the call from the night before, but later that night, around the same time, I got another call. The number wasn't saved in my phone again, but it was different from the number that had called me the night before. This time, I answered it immediately. Exactly what I was dreading happened. It was another static-heavy recording of a conversation I had that day with a client. A different client. A whole different conversation entirely. I hung up again without saying anything. That night was when it really started getting to me, because now it felt intentional, and I noticed something else. The recording didn't include the client's voice. It was only me talking, like a one-sided call. I started wondering if someone had been listening in on my conversations and recording me somehow. I didn't sleep very well that night, as I couldn't stop thinking about it, but I didn't know what to do. I never thought I was a paranoid person, but the next week of my life proved me wrong. Every night for a week, the same thing would happen. I'd get a call from a random number and would listen to a staticky recording of a conversation I'd had that day. I started recording the calls myself. I can't even tell you why. I just thought it was the smart thing to do. By the third or fourth night, it started to wear on me. Not just in a creepy, this is weird kind of way. I mean, it started to actually mess with my head. I couldn't relax, I couldn't think. I'd catch myself looking out the window every few minutes, like someone might be standing out there watching me. I started triple locking my front door. Then I started leaving a light on in every room at night. At one point, I even moved a chair in front of my bedroom door. Looking back, it's really hard for me to explain any of these decisions, but my mind was in a very different place during that period. Anytime my phone rang, even during the day, I'd step outside and answer it from the safety of my car, where I could see every angle around me. It sounds crazy now, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. At one point, I even brought it up with the police. I felt ridiculous doing it, but I figured if someone was monitoring me, I had to at least make some kind of report. The officer I spoke to was polite enough, but I could tell right away they didn't take it seriously. He said they could try looking into the numbers, but unless there was a direct threat or evidence of harassment, there wasn't much they could do. I don't know if they actually tried to trace the calls or just filed it away and forgot about it. Either way, it didn't help. If anything, it made me feel more alone in it. A few days later, though, the calls suddenly stopped. That week of obsessively checking my surroundings and answering calls from my car must have deterred whoever was harassing me. Part of me wanted to believe it was over, but I couldn't relax. If anything, the sudden absence of contact actually caused me to spiral even further into paranoia. My mom is schizophrenic, so I always figured I was predisposed to developing some kind of mental condition, but it was literally happening right before my very eyes. I was becoming one of those reclusive people who think the entire world is spying on them. I ended up getting a brand new personal phone number. It was a massive headache. Switching numbers meant having to reestablish contact with clients, update everything linked to my phone, and risk missing out on people trying to get in touch with me. But I did it anyway. I couldn't shake the feeling that my old number had been compromised somehow. After a few more days of radio silence, the thing I was dreading happened. One night after work, I got another call. It was exactly like the ones before it. I kept my cool, and instead of remaining silent and hanging up, I actually spoke. I said something along the lines of, "I don't know who you are or why you're doing this, but if it's money you want, I've got it." I went on to say that I'd happily pay to be left alone. I gave the person my address and said I'd be willing to meet. And then, for the first time, there was an actual voice on the other end. It sounded like they were using a voice changer. And all they said was, 11 o'clock, before hanging up. I know what you're thinking. Why the hell would I volunteer my address like that? Honestly, I can't answer that question. I was acting irrationally, I know that. But it's impossible for me to explain exactly how my mind was working during that time, so I'm not even gonna bother. The next 4 days were the most traumatic and stressful moments of my life. I'm not sure how much I can even type out without getting too graphic, but here goes. I have a handgun in my house for personal safety. I grabbed it from my room, loaded it, and sat at my kitchen table and waited. I can't even begin to explain all the thoughts that were bouncing around in my head as I sat there. I contemplated a lot of things in those 4 hours. I'd go as far as to say that had it not been for sheer chance, I might not be typing this out right now. Just thinking about that night gives me a sickening feeling. 11 p.m. came and went, and no one showed up. There's no telling what I would have done had they actually showed up. I ended up sleeping at the kitchen table with the gun in my hand. It was by far the worst night of my life, but thankfully, that was the end of it. I never got another mysterious call again, but that didn't change the fact that that person had done irreparable damage to my mental state. It took me a lot of therapy and time off work to recover fully, and I still get chills thinking about how easily I was almost driven to complete madness. I will never have an explanation for what happened to me. I have no idea how that person recorded my conversations or who they even were. I have no idea why they harassed me or why they stopped for that matter. I've since moved out of that house, but there's not much I can do beyond that. If anything, this experience has made me a lot more fearful of the future. I can't help but think that I'm destined to end up just like my mom. Hopefully getting this out there will help me heal in some way. This happened when I was a little kid, maybe 6 or 7. My family has always been very religious, so Easter has always been a huge deal for us. Same with most of the other major religious holidays. Now that I think of it, even Sunday kind of felt like its own holiday with the way my parents treated church. It's actually kind of funny. Some of my earliest memories are church-related. What I'm about to tell you is one of them. It was Easter Sunday, so all the services are much longer than usual. I don't mind though. My parents instilled the love of Christ in me very early on. After the service was Sunday school, or CCD as our church called it. I know lots of churches don't offer Sunday school after really important masses, but ours did. So after the mass, my parents took me downstairs to all the classrooms like they had done 100 times, and I said goodbye. I'm just going to describe the layout of the church now so this story makes sense. Our church had kind of a split-level layout. The main sanctuary was upstairs where the altar and pews were, and then all the classrooms were in the basement. It was technically a basement, but the church was on a slope. You could still get in and out of the building from down there. There was this long carpeted hallway down there with maybe 7 or 8 rooms branching off on each side, grouped by age. My classroom was one of the first ones on the left. At the very end of the hallway were the 2 bathrooms, one for boys and one for girls. Right next to those was a heavy gray door that led outside. It was almost always locked from the inside, but I remember being told it could be used in case of an emergency. The adults always warned us to never leave from that door because it would automatically lock behind us, and we'd have no way of getting back inside the church. But anyway, back to the story. The whole downstairs had been decorated for Easter, like really decorated. The walls were covered in pastel streamers and little paper cutouts of lambs and crosses, and there were drawings of Jesus with kids taped up between the classroom doors. Some of the teachers had even worn these cheap bunny ears you get at CVS. It actually felt more festive down there than it had upstairs during Mass. All the kids were in a good mood too, probably because everyone knew there'd be egg hunts later in the day. Normally I'd wait until class was over to go to the bathroom, but because the Easter service had run way longer than usual Masses, and I couldn't hold it, I raised my hand and asked to go, and the teacher excused me from the room. The bathrooms were maybe 15 feet down the hall, and it wasn't uncommon for kids to go by themselves. They always said if we took too long, they'd come check, but I don't remember that ever actually happening. So I slipped out quietly while the rest of the class was coloring pictures of the empty tomb and Jesus rising from it. I went into the boys' bathroom and shut the stall door behind me. It was quiet, but those bathrooms were old. All I could hear was the soft hum of the fluorescent lights and the faint sound of a teacher's voice echoing down the hallway. But as I was sitting there, I suddenly heard this weird scraping sound coming from the stall next to mine. It didn't sound like anything normal, not like someone shifting or unlocking a door. It was the slow, uneven metal sound, like something was being dragged or scraped against the inside of the door. Not loud, but sharp. I don't remember being scared. I was mostly just confused. At first, I thought it was another kid, so I kept quiet and finished up my business. As I was washing my hands, though, I looked into the mirror and saw that stall door opening slowly, but instead of another kid stepping out, it was a grown man wearing an Easter bunny costume. I remember the way the ears flopped forward a little and how the suit looked off. It was kind of saggy and stained in places, like it hadn't been washed ever. The fur was more of a grayish white than a bright white, and one of the eyes on the head looked like it had been sewn back on crooked. But the thing is, I don't remember being scared when I saw him. Not then. Like I said, I was pretty young, and in my mind, this was just the Easter bunny making a surprise visit. I actually smiled when I turned around. I think I even said something like, "Hi." He didn't say anything at first, just stood there halfway out of the stall, staring at me. His head was tilted slightly, and he didn't move. I remember feeling a little awkward, like I wasn't sure if I was supposed to say something else. Then, after a long pause, he stepped all the way out and slowly raised one of his arms, pointing towards the door like he was guiding me out. That's when he finally spoke. His voice was muffled behind the costume, but I still remember the exact words. He said, "You're the lucky chosen child. I have a gift for you, outside." I didn't even hesitate. I was excited, like genuinely thrilled at the idea that I'd been picked for some kind of special Easter surprise. I think the fact that this was happening in my church gave me a false sense of security or something. I pushed open the big gray door without thinking twice, not even remembering that it was supposed to stay locked. The Easter bunny followed right behind, not saying anything else. He started walking across the pavement toward the far corner of the church parking lot. There was a car parked back there, mostly hidden from view by the dumpster and a few scraggly bushes. I remember thinking it was weird that he had parked so far away, and that he didn't even have a basket of candy or anything. At one point, he started holding my hand. We were maybe halfway across the lot when I saw it. A second Easter bunny stepping out from a car he was leading me to. At first, I just stopped walking. My little brain didn't know what to make of it. I remember looking back and forth between the two of them, completely confused. I hadn't seen that car earlier, and now there were 2 Easter bunnies? Something about it didn't feel magical anymore. It just felt wrong. To this day, I've always thought of what happened next as an act of God. One of the teachers, I think her name was Miss Sabrina, just happened to be walking around the church, maybe heading out to prep for the egg hunt or check on something outside. She looked over at the parking lot right as I was being led over to the car. I'll never forget the sound she made. I've never heard a more terrifying scream in my life. The man in the costume immediately let go of my hand and bolted for the car, and without thinking, I took off running in the opposite direction toward Miss Sabrina. Once I was safe in her arms, I turned my head just in time to catch a glimpse of the car, which was now speeding out of the parking lot. I'm not 100% positive, but I'm pretty sure I saw another kid in the back seat of that car. Miss Sabrina wasn't even looking, but I told her what I had seen and she took me seriously. The next few hours are a little blurry. Miss Sabrina alerted the other adults right away, and police eventually made me tell them what happened. They asked about the kid I said I saw in the back seat, and I did my best to describe him, even though I had only seen him for like a split second, and I wasn't even sure if my mind was playing tricks on me or not. My parents were the most upset, and for good reason. I think my mom cried for an hour straight after we went home. The police followed up with the church, but nothing ever came of it. There were no missing children in the area, so the police didn't really have anything to work on. The running theory was that whoever had been in that costume somehow had a key to the back door and just sat in the bathroom waiting for a kid to use it. And by sheer misfortune, that kid had been me. I still find the whole thing deeply unsettling. Whoever had done that must have been familiar with the church's layout. Otherwise, they wouldn't have known where to park or wait, or even how to get away with it all. But what scares me the most is that I think there really was a kid in the backseat of that car. It's hard for an Easter to come and go without me thinking about this experience.